Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's always the first criticism that you'll hear from opponents of the court in the United States, that this is a tool that our enemies of the United States will use for political purposes to prosecute U.S. leaders. In the case of the use of torture, it's the same with anything. One, the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, and so the court cannot mount an investigation without first us being a party and second us inviting us. Or, alternatively, the Security Council would have to refer the case. Now, the United States is a member of the Permanent Five on Security Council with a veto. I think it's unlikely. You know, John Bolton says in the film it'll be a cold day in hell before the U.S. signs the court. I actually think it's much more likely that the U.S. will become a party to the Rome Statute than the International Criminal Court would ever launch an investigation on U.S. officials. And that's largely because of this principle that's raised in the film of complementarity.
Right.
And that is that the court is a court of last resort. It's a court that steps in to fill a void when domestic courts, and so U.S. courts, are either unable or unwilling to prosecute its own war criminals and those responsible for crimes against humanity. Now, the United States, as we've seen, this debate over how to deal with individuals in the previous administration accused of masterminding this torture regime, the debate, the domestic debate over how we, the United States government and people of the United States, deal with that is obviously one that's lively and vibrant and hard fought. And I don't think you could make the case reasonably in any forum that the U.S. is unable to address and to punish war criminals or those responsible for crimes against humanity in the United States.
I think it's interesting that you bring up John Bolton, because I think that certainly I've seen the film The Reckoning now twice, and that was the point in both cases when the audience kind of laughs, because he really comes across as looking just so ridiculous, frankly, in his very, very strong criticism against it. And I think particularly in the film his comments come in contrast with David Sheffer, who was the U.S. representative to the Rome Conference in 1998, who certainly voices some concerns about the Rome Statute and the U.S. involvement with the ICC, but also, you know, certainly also notes the very compelling reasons for this court to exist. And so I think those two sets of comments, I think, begin to illustrate the U.S. position towards the court over time. And I think if you could maybe talk a little bit more about that history, that would be interesting.
Sure. You know, this is really, the U.S. engagement with the court is really a tale of two governments, and now we're at the beginning of two administrations, and we're now at the beginning of a third, so the jury's still out. The Clinton administration was very involved in the establishment of the ICC. It was involved in negotiating the Rome Statute, and specifically, as was noted in the film, one on this issue of complementarity, ensuring that this nightmare scenario of the court becoming a political tool to go after whoever without any checks and balances wouldn't happen, that complementarity principle is in place. Another area that the U.S. was very involved was in the ability to suspend investigations, to suspend arrest warrants. The U.S. position is ultimately the position that was adopted, and that was that when a suspension of an investigation was in the interests of peace, the Security Council had to make that decision, and that was only a one-year renewable suspension. And why is that important? It's important because then the threat of prosecution becomes a point of leverage on which it's always out there. The threat that the International Criminal Court can step in and take action if a country is unwilling or unable, or if the interest of peace, if peace is turned back into war, that it's always there. The Bush administration, on the other hand, took an entirely different approach. You know, John Bolton, from his remarks in the film, not only was he he opposed to the court. He seemed to take immense personal satisfaction and personal glee almost in his active opposition to the court. And it's indicative of really the way that the previous administration treated most of our international obligations. This was, you remember, an administration of whom a senior official referred to the Geneva Conventions. These are the laws guiding armed conflict as quaint. So it's not surprising that the Bush administration was opposed to the court. And now we've entered a new, a new era. So who knows what's next?
Okay, great. And I want to take a question now from the chat. Thank you for submitting your questions online. We're going to step back actually and talk about Somalia again. And the question is, how can the ICC investigate and enforce war crimes in Somalia where there is no functioning government?
Yeah, this is a case where the avenue would be through a referral from the UN Security Council, and I think there's mounting support for at least looking closely at the possibility of an ICC investigation, and I think the first step toward that is something that Enough and Human Rights Watch and others have recommended, and that is a commission of inquiry. This is an official UN-backed, UN-sponsored commission of experts to go out and look at crimes that have been committed, to identify responsibility, and to make recommendations to the Council on how to address it. Now, this is how the Darfur case was referred to the ICC. It was a commission of inquiry led by a former international prosecutor and a respected legal scholar who, 140-page report, well-documented atrocities committed by many parties, however, overwhelmingly committed by the government and its proxy forces. And based on the evidence that they found, they then recommended to the court, to the Security Council, that the case go to the ICC. So I think for Somalia, where crimes have been, again, committed by all sides, Ethiopian government, the Somali transitional government, as well as numerous militias and insurgent forces, that this is a case that, if we can have a commission of inquiry that's going to look into Somalia and provide recommendations, that would be the first step toward a potential ICC investigation. Okay,
great. And here's another question from via chat. There's interest in hearing about this decision of trying people in The Hague versus in Africa where the crimes are committed. And can you talk a little bit about the back and forth over that discussion? Because I think there is a challenge of communicating what happens in The Hague back to the areas where people are.
Yeah,